Everybody,
Welcome, welcome, welcome on this Transformation Leaders podcast before Thanksgiving. And we're happy to be here today to talk about a really interesting subject that I know a lot of us have challenges with. And that is when you're doing digital transformation, do you build, buy, or partner? So, just to be clear and setting the table here with my co-host David Soden, build is where you're developing the solution in house, right? Where you're going through and you are hiring a professional services company or people internally to align significant time and resources to build a solution bespoke to the business area of concern. Now, buy is when you go on the marketplace and you find something that is 80% there, and then you deploy it, you pay for it, you deploy it, and then you do whatever customization that you can to make it work for your use case. And then partnering is where you reach out to somebody who is doing something very similar, and then you wrap them into your ecosystem. So you divide and conquer, if you will. That partner has something that they're doing, a service that you can add into your services, and then you pay them at the wholesale rate and you charge for the retail rate. So that's just to understand these three different options. And this particular problem in my career comes up every 2 to 3 months, right?
Yep.
Where whether it be internally, we're having this discussion, we're helping a client navigate this, and through the several different businesses I've created, this was an everlasting motion. So, David, what has your experience been on this topic?
Pretty much rinse and repeat of what you just said, with maybe some more in the trench type of things. I may have been either involved in at a low level writing some pieces of the code for it, or maybe orchestrating. This is probably where I've been for the last 10, 15 years, is either orchestrating teams globally or locally or combination therein for a lot of those projects. And so from my perspective, or from the inside out perspective, there's a different type of leadership. So there's a leadership within the trench, and then there's executive leadership at the organizational level. The only thing I can say on all three of those use cases that you had just mentioned about build, buy, or partner, is that oftentimes there's a disconnect between leadership within the organization. So there's the business needs and obviously they're sponsoring and paying for whatever said initiative. The problem is if that need isn't properly communicated from the top down, or the people driving it from inside the trench that says they're essentially just, yes men and women that tell people what they want to hear, but not what they need to hear, or they're weak in project management, program management, XYZ, they're not going to be able to pull teeth or extract the information properly out of executive management to get the right information. And so this is where I've lived and learned quite a bit over the last several, almost feels like now 2 decades, is that people typically don't know what they want until they have something tangible to see or play with or try. And that's very challenging because a lot of times you get in a project and you try to do your best on the front end to figure out, hey, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, yeah. And then you deliver it and it's like, hey, it's exactly what you look for. Where's this? Why is this way? I'm like, where was that feedback from the beginning? And it's like, so I'll say at a high level and I'll turn it back over to you, but essentially a proof of concept to iterate and learn and fail. And more importantly, selfishly, from your point of view, if you're where I am in the bottom, or even if you're at the executive level and doing the sponsorship for the money, insist on this type of flow because it's going to be successful for you as an organization to see something you don't like, critique it, change it, and then have it evolve and grow. But go through the high level, at least to get an outline or a framework. And it's not always possible to do this, I understand. But when you can, do it because you can and do it because you should, and try not to just put it off, because you're going to have a lot of pain to work through and a lot of doubt, a lot of expense, and a lot of delays if you don't follow that one little tiny, seems innocent, but when you get into it, you'll realize exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, best practice is always important here. From my experience, it has been, there's kind of two different ways that you go this. There is the lone gunman approach, right? Where you do your own personal research and you go execute. You know, certainly as a guy coming from a startup background at one point, that's kind of what has been done. Because, you know, when you have a team of 2 or 3, you know, and they're executing, you know, it's hard to bring everybody into the strategic circle. But best practice is you want to create a stakeholders meeting, right? You want to clearly identify, to your point, what the business problem is that you're trying to attack, right? And with the nature of this, it better be a large one, right? Sure. And in that case, you're going to need to do all the definition of the business problem, the business opportunity, right? And then you're going to want to include people on the sales side, on the marketing side, on the finance side, right? You want to include people on the technology side. And you want to be able to have the right people in the boat with you so that when you go through this process, and more importantly, exit the process, you come out the other side with not only a plan, but lieutenants to the plan, right? People are going to help you execute the plan. So having a stakeholder approach is the first thing that you really need to do. And as part of that, and after you've defined the problem, you need to do your homework, right? And that's really the heart of the build, buy, or partner, right? You're going to have finite options in the build and partner arena. In my experience, the partner is really the most challenging one because a lot of people are very uncomfortable and kind of teaming up with a third party and putting your eggs in their basket.
Yep. Well said.
But, you know, your market opportunity may be such where you have 6 months to execute. And a lot of people, and again, I'm, you know, on engineering side and I'm a builder. That's what I do. You know, you're going to come knock on my door and say, hey, we need to execute in 3 months. Well, if your timeline of your business opportunity expires in 3 months, you have very few options, right? So again, I tell this one little niche to talk about really, it's about strategic alignment to the goal. That's the first thing. You know, a famous friend of mine once told me, you don't want to shoot in front of the duck or behind the duck. You want to shoot the duck, right? If whatever your goal is cannot be obtained through the majority of the options, your job is a lot easier, actually. You know, if you have one option and the other option is basically do nothing, that is a very easy discussion and decision to make. You know, not all ideas are winners, right? So going through the process and evaluating that. Now, in this process, having somebody with competency on the various different sides, whether it be marketing, sales, technology, you know, that's part of the day job me and David have. So, you know, don't be afraid to reach out for help on your strategic technology partners. David, do you have a point on this?
Yeah, a couple of good pointers that you had brought up. I'll work my way backwards from the partner. And you did a great illustration about if you're in a time crunch, partnering usually is a good case, but you need to be cognizant and aware of the risk that just like building on platforms where there's somebody else's code base that you're building your code base on, that gets really scary and sketchy, especially with, not to beat a dead horse, because we do talk a lot about generative AI on the show, but open AI is moving ever so slowly beyond their, service as a service type of scenario. And they're getting more into the platform or area or the product. And the point is, if you start building things on these platforms, now these platforms own a significant part of whatever it is that you're doing. And so there's a bunch of risk that's in that. So what I would caveat to that endpoint is, to Sean's point, if you have a timeline crunch, then you go partner, you build, and you do whatever. I'll mention another use case scenario is that maybe you're unsure about an investment for internal build, or maybe you don't want to spend a huge license amount on some whatever it is. Most of the stuff today is software as a service, is pretty cheap. However, that being said, you're going to run into use cases to where maybe you're just not quite sure that the outcome is, or let me use an analogy. The juice is worth the squeeze, so to speak, right? And so you want to prove the concept. And if you partner with somebody with something pre-built that's almost where you need to be, this allows you to have or get into whatever it is you're trying to get into in a relatively low risk scenario, with the strategic idea that this is a temporary solution to test the waters to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? And if it is, then now you take that off the table. And while this is still in play, you work on the backfill system, whether you build it in-house or whether you find, some other person or company to, build it for you, or whatever the case may be. And then you just replace the system. But now you know that the investment's worth it because it's essentially proven itself. You've got a bunch of people. Yeah, it's a little bit more investment step as far as the time and migrating and moving stuff that can get complicated. But if you execute it properly, it can be an absolutely awesome strategic approach, save your company buttloads of money, especially if it fails. You just turn it off, because if it doesn't work, you're done. And your accountant's going to love you because you'll have a nice big tax write-off at the end of the year because it's a service and you don't have to, spread that over multiple years. Anyway, not tax advice, but just trying to say there's some strategic advantages financially to that type of strategy. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's a great point that we really didn't talk about, which is, build, buy, or partner was what we started with, but it could very well be partner, then buy, then build.
Yep.
So when you're looking at it, it's not a zero-sum game when you're having these kind of discussions. And it may make sense, to your point, and I've done this in my career, where we partnered with a company that had technology outside of ours, and we started partnering with them, reselling it because they were a really high quality product. It had really hairy edges. And what we did was we built technology around that with it as the core. And frankly, that partnership, they immediately said, uh-oh, now you have technology that makes our technology just part of an overall solution. And then I, in fact, had to pull a team together and essentially build a piece to replace them because they wouldn't allow us to resell it anymore. So, this is not a zero-sum game.
Yep.
What I think you're focusing more on is the risk side, right? So when you build, buy, and partner, there are different risk profiles. So for a build risk, you would be talking about time.
And
You'd
money.
be talking about, do you have the skill sets? Do you have the confidence that the investment, to your point earlier, the juice is worth the squeeze or the outcome, right? If you're talking about buy, this solves your time crunch, but the investment is going to be significant. You're most likely pre-baking in revenue when you go in and buy this, because you can then run it. Or if you're buying a company, for example, that has this technology, you are getting a revenue boost, but you're going to be paying a premium for this technology. So after 6-9 months, whoever approved that buy is going to say, show me your revenue that you've gotten from that. Have you met the ROI necessary for doing the buy? So there's risk in that too. Lastly is the partner, right? So if you partner with somebody and that partner, as I stated before, at one point thinks you're a threat and no longer allows you to sell, or they take your customer list and they try to sell without you, right?
Yep, that happens.
You could have a technology that you find out that they are leaking customer data, right? You have situations where they go out of business.
Mm-hmm.
So, when you think partner, think about marriage, right? If you to get out of that kind of relationship is going to be a significant cost. So starting with one and moving on to another may reduce the risk, but may increase the cost. So this is why it's so important to really look at the strategic alignment of what you're trying to do, what time do you need to get done at, and what kind of outcome is expected or achieved.
Yep.
And if you put your name on all three of those answers, the business owners will hold you accountable. So having stakeholders who will sign up and say, these numbers are right, will help, not completely, but help insulate you on whatever the outcome may be.
Yeah, I think when you said partnership, that is kind of a path of least resistance on the front end. But like you said, the exit strategy, if need be, is always messy. And I think a lot of partners and partnership agreements, they don't, for lack of a better term, at least from what I've seen, and I worked in the legal industry for almost 20 years, and I've saw a lot of contract law in my day. And one of the things that I've always saw that I found interesting, and using Sean's analogy, there's no, again, for lack of a better term, a prenup clause that seems to be in there that just says, hey, listen, like they have things and maybe a little stuff in a preamble, the boilerplate stuff about, mediation, should there be an agreement to disagree, and that kind of stuff, but no real good. I mean, some might have it. At least the ones that I've seen didn't seem to focus on that a lot. But my point here is it's really easy to sign to get into the contract, but getting out of it, only if it's successful will you have the pain. If it's just failing because it's just the juice isn't worth the squeeze, getting out is probably going to be as easy as getting in, because nobody wants to deal with it. They're like, yeah, whatever, get away. Nobody has any skin in the game. And
Right.
The other thing to look at, if you're a CEO and you're listening to this podcast, there's going to have different folks in your organization that are going to have vested interest. So the partnership, obviously, your legal teams might be quite keen on this because it's something in their area of expertise and wheelhouse. You may gravitate towards that because of maybe some internal trust with those said people. The other thing too is when you're looking to buy, a lot of times you're going to get a lot of favorability from the accountants because they know what ROI is. They have a predictable expenditure. They know what it's going to cost. They have assumptions on revenue based on, what they have or what they think they could get. Or if there's already revenue and you're buying to transfer or transfer into, or you're going from any of these solutions into that solution, there's a lot of knowns, and it makes the accountants really, really comfortable to give you, the CEO, the answers that you're looking for and support that. You're going to get potentially some or a lot of pushback from IT, especially if anybody needs to use the software and they have a preference towards building it and you have a development team in-house. Development teams are going to be more in favor of the build because they have full control. Anything that you ask, they can build it per se, unless they make a really bad coding decision, which does happen. That typically they'll get all of that control. So you're going to have different people with vested interests. The only thing I can caveat for executive management, one thing you should definitely make sure that your middle tier or somebody like me, architects, are sitting in, is going to have enough foresight into the future to say, okay, listen, we're going to buy this pre-baked platform from an 800-pound gorilla, and you can fill in the blank for CRMs. There's a whole bunch of them out there. And the question that you should be asking is, yes, it's going to get us 80% of the way there. How are we going to fix or address the missing 20%? And what facilities are there to do this? We're living in a day and age where everything's online, everything's on the internet, and almost everything has an API. And it's deceiving, because when you get into the low-level trench, into my level and even the lower levels, if you don't know what that API is capable of, and I don't mean to get really geeky because this is not a show about the low-level trenches, but if you have a very specific ask, you better make sure that there is an API area, an endpoint, a facility for somebody to programmatically access to get or put in the data that is needed for whatever outcome at the task level. Because if you miss that, you're going to find yourself into this almost partner agreement, because quite frankly, even these software as a services, you have a huge investment of your time and energy to put information into it. And especially if it's an 800-pound gorilla system, it takes a significant amount of time, energy, and effort to get out of it and transfer it from system A to system B, or even if you're building it. So just know that before you jump in head first, make sure the facilities are at the granular level to support the missing pieces of the puzzle. Because if you miss that critical component, it is going to cost your company dearly. And it's going to potentially double or triple the amount of effort and energy just on that one. If you know anything about Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule, you're working the inverse, right? Because at this point, you tried to solve 80% of your problems, and in trade for the 20%. But that 20% is going to cost you 80% of your investment. And you didn't budget for that. You only budgeted for 20. This is where the inversion comes back to bite you in the tail. So just do your diligence around that missing component, that missing piece. And I think you will have a much better ride, longevity, long-term, to know, is this the right system for me? And if you get into these sketchy areas, now you need to look at and really do a cost and that benefit analysis from build versus buy from there. And then, of course, we already covered earlier, everything, at least at the highest level, for, should I partner?
Yeah. And important to note, a lot of people think, okay, we're going to buy some code. We're going to partner for some code. Yes, that is not a business solution. It is people, process, and tools or technology. So yes, you can buy or partner and most likely get one of these. With a partnership, maybe you get two of the three. But you need to understand that you still need to market it. You still need to sell it right. You still need to make sure that the finances make sense. So, whatever you do, there is going to be a subset of it. It's going to be billed anyway. But the best approach that we can recommend is establish a stakeholder meeting. Go through your options, investigate them fully with zero preconceptions. Have a conversation of which ones you want to model. David, your point earlier on a proof of concept, give your build team, a week, 2 weeks, 30 days, right? Show me what you can do. Maybe it's just a Figma wireframe, right? Show me what you can do. Give me some numbers, right? And we do this every day. A client knocks on the door. We want to do this. This is what our requirements are. This is what it needs to be. Can you go through and put together what it would take, what the outcome would be? And we detail that information for them. Now, I'm sure that they're taking that and comparing it to, okay, if we buy this third party or we partner up with somebody else's technology, and all the numbers need to align. And by the way, we do things other than just writing code, from a marketing perspective, from a strategic consulting perspective. So, we could go through and give numbers across the board on these things. But the end of the day is that you will see that here's what the costs would be. And then here are the time frames, right? So cost and time are the two most important things that you're going to look at. And then we talked about strategic alignment already, right? Does this make sense for us in the medium and long term, if it makes sense in the short term? So these all need to be metrics that you're weighting these different options on. Your risk profile. Remember, David, you talked about that immediately. What are your risks, right? How risk adverse are you? When do those risks come out? Are they short, medium, or long term, right? The other thing that I want to make sure you think about is the skill sets required. So are you buying a blockchain company? Do you have blockchain skill sets? So your consumer or customer or clients, whoever is using this business solution, they are going to expect that the insides and outsides, even though you don't control the technology if you buy it and build or partner with it. So, there's a certain obligation that you're going to have on skill sets no matter what. And then I think you alluded to this as well. What's the flexibility and control? So let's say, for example, you came up with a great idea using machine learning 5 years ago. And then when Gen AI came out, your partner that you partnered up with, they're like, well, we don't do that. We don't know anything about that. And then so you're stuck in the situation where, okay, you're tied to an issue where perhaps you cannot innovate. They have decided to monetize their investment and it is going to cost you sales. So how can you add on to that? So you're going to be thinking, what's the future-proof part as well? So lots of things to think about on this problem. This is why it is such a common discussion point. And thanks for the listener out there who recommended this, because it comes down to the details are what matters. One of the most common questions I get as a consultant is, Sean, which way would you do this? Option A or option B? And they always get frustrated when I give them the same answer. It depends. Right? This is why consulting is so important, because it always depends. There's nuance in every scenario. David?
Yeah, so I was going to say, in addition to the frustration that they might get from you saying depends, there's something or some things that they may be able to do. And I don't care if you're at the senior executive level or if you're in the middle tier level where you're still involved in a lot in the day-to-day, or even the trench or whatever you want to call it. is that there are organizations, there are groups, there are lots of things that you can join where either if you're in middle management or whatever it might be, or middle technologist, see how others are doing their jobs. What challenges are they facing? Like, learn from their mistakes, because it's free usually to join these groups. And even if it's not, then that definitely may be a great investment. And the other thing too is that the very, very large, or the largest of the largest corporations, there's organizations, there's leadership groups, there's Voldemort groups, like groups of those who should not be named, maybe Bilderberg or whatever. There's a lot of these organizations at the very, very high level, and they talk about, hey, listen, this is what's going on. This is how to get around it. And they strategize together. You would think that, hey, they're competing, they're competitors, or they're competing. But in lots of ways, they're like, no, we don't look at it from this perspective. They look at it from, how do we change industries from what it is to maybe where it needs to be? And they can't do it if they're the only company out there doing it. So if you think, I don't know, I'll pick on the oil companies or whatever. If they want to go and make the next greatest thing using oil, one company will maybe try to innovate it, and then they'll share it with their peers. Hey, look, and this is here, and they may have joint collaboration. They may even do vertical collaborations where it's not direct line competition, but at least their end objective, their end goals are in a unison or in alignment in some way. And those lessons learned are still applicable, because it doesn't matter what you're doing, how you're getting from point A to point B, as long as your destination remains the same. You need to talk to these people, because they have a lot of information that you can learn from and get from free. So consultants I always think are good, but typically they're high dollar, high powered, and there's a reason you pay for them. But there's other additional ways, whether you consider it research or tactics or strategies, that you can use to get that really good information to help you make the right decision.
Absolutely. And that is what's most important. One last call out before I wrap up today is around IP, right? So
Yes.
you may want to understand the intellectual property required to do things. There are things like DMCA, there are HIPAA concerns, there are all kinds of different regulations. There are patents out there that people and patent trolls who will find you and wait for you to get a significant pipeline going before launching a cease and desist, right? Their job is to try to take some of your profit, half of it usually. So you may want to make sure that whatever you're doing is being taken care of, or whoever you're partnering with, that they are providing you indemnification. Indemnification is the key word when you are using somebody else's technology and saying you are responsible for these acts.
Yep.
Or you get a third party, and I know we talk about this all the time because this is what we do, but a third party to come in and do that due diligence that David talked about on the IP, to make sure that it is according to any patents or compliance issues, licensing issues, to make sure that the price before you pay it, because you may end up having to pay lawsuits for compliance issues and licensing issues as you go through further down the road. And that includes if you're building it. If your people go on websites or use libraries that are not public domain, there will be certain licensing things that you need to think about. So again, build, buy, and partner is one of the most complex and common engagements that you do in digital transformation. And if you do not do this due diligence of looking at your options, you're letting yourself open to navel gazing whenever adverse market conditions occur that do not get you the outcome that you're expecting. David, I'll hand it over back to you for a last note.
Yeah, so last notes, obviously, as we opened up, Sean said that next week is Thanksgiving, so call out to that. Both Sean and I will be off next week, so we will not be broadcasting, but we will see you on the following week to come. If you would like to reach out to either Sean or I, we can help you from anything from your patents, questions, not that we're attorneys, but from a product standpoint, and maybe you've got some questions around that, to have a deeper conversation around which strategy might be right for you. And, maybe we can help you out with something in those lines. We specialize in build run. So anything, and also design, of course, too. But if you have any specific challenges in any one of those pockets, or just need everything, we're minimally, it's a long way of saying that we're here to help you in anything that you have or that you need. You can find both Sean and I on LinkedIn. You can check us out online at transformationleaderspodcast.com. And until next time, we'll see you later. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.